I jolted awake to a cacophony of shattering glass and muffled curses echoing through the early morning air. For a moment, I lay still in my bed, heart pounding, trying to piece together what I had just heard. Then it hit me. The familiar, indispensable hum of activity that usually greeted my day, my carefully built wheelchair ramp, the very ramp that ensured my independence, was gone. Instead of the smooth, secure incline I relied on to get to my front door, there was nothing but twisted metal and shattered concrete. I scrambled to the window, my eyes widening in disbelief as I took in the scene below. In the front yard of my modest home, where I had painstakingly constructed a ramp after years of hard work and determination, a ragged mess now lay in ruins. The evidence of deliberate destruction was unmistakable. Chunks of concrete scattered like broken promises, a twisted metal frame that once supported hope now lying on its side. And standing amid the wreckage was none other than HOA, Karen. Her face set in an expression of smug satisfaction, as if she'd executed a long-planned mission. I knew something was terribly wrong. My ramp wasn't just a structure. It was my gateway to the world, a lifeline that granted me the freedom to come and go without dependence. And now, it was obliterated by someone who claimed to be safeguarding our community standards. The horror of the scene was almost surreal. The very person who prided herself on enforcing rules had taken it upon herself to exact a personal vendetta against me. In that moment of shock and despair, I heard a distant click from outside. My neighbor, a kind soul with a penchant for recording the unusual, had unknowingly captured the entire debacle on their phone. I realized then that Karen's act of vandalism, intended to intimidate and humiliate, would soon be broadcast for all to see. The thought both chilled and emboldened me. If the evidence was indisputable, then Karen would have to face the consequences of her actions, publicly and without recourse. I knew my response had to be measured, creative, and above all, a declaration of my right to live independently. This was not just about a ramp. It was about dignity, respect, and the freedom to navigate my own life without fear of bullying. And as the morning light began to break through the smoke and debris, I resolved that I would not be silenced. Today, Karen's abuse of power was about to be exposed in full, and I would reclaim not only my ramp but my autonomy. The small suburban community of Elmwood Heights was known for its manicured lawns, identical houses, and an unwavering adherence to a strict set of rules enforced by the local homeowners association. In Elmwood Heights, every inch of property was expected to conform to a uniform standard, an aesthetic ideal that prioritized order and predictability over individuality. It was in this controlled environment that I had built my modest home, complete with a wheelchair ramp that I had crafted with my own two hands after years of struggle and perseverance. At the center of this rigid system was Karen Miller, universally known as HOA Karen. In her early 50s, Karen was the embodiment of suburban authoritarianism. Always impeccably dressed in conservative attire, her clipboard and smartphone were never far from her grasp. Karen took it upon herself to patrol the neighborhood with an unyielding determination to preserve the pristine order of Elmwood Heights. Any deviation from the prescribed standard, be it an unapproved decoration, an unconventional garden layout, or, as it turned out, a personally built wheelchair ramp, was met with swift and uncompromising action. I, by contrast, had always valued freedom and creativity over rigid conformity. Having grown up facing physical challenges, I learned early on that every barrier I overcame was a testament to my resilience. The wheelchair ramp I built wasn't merely a convenience. It was a symbol of my independence and self-reliance. Every carved piece of wood, every carefully poured layer of concrete, was a milestone on my journey to reclaim my mobility and dignity. My home was not a sterile display of uniformity, but a personal haven, a blend of functionality and character that reflected my life's struggles and triumphs. While many of my neighbors quietly accepted the HOA's strict guidelines for fear of fines and public reprimand, there was an undercurrent of dissent among a few who admired individuality. Yet, Karen's influence was so pervasive that most kept their opinions to themselves. Until, That fateful day when she decided that my ramp, which represented my hard-won independence, was an eyesore in need of correction. In her mind, my ramp was a violation of community standards, a blemish that must be erased to maintain the neighborhood's immaculate reputation. As I prepared for the day ahead, I recalled how I had once envisioned Elmwood Heights as a place where community and individuality could coexist harmoniously. Instead, it had become a battleground for petty disputes and bureaucratic overreach. The destruction of my ramp was not just an act of vandalism. It was a direct challenge to my right to live freely and express myself on my own property. It was this confrontation that set the stage for the dramatic events to follow. I was not one to cower in the face of injustice. With the memory of every setback fueling my resolve, I knew that I had to fight back. I began to formulate a plan, not just to repair the physical damage, but to expose Karen's abuse of power in a way that would be impossible to ignore. And unbeknownst to her, the neighbor's smartphone had captured every moment of her misdeed, ensuring that the truth would soon be laid bare for all of Elmwood Heights to see. The discovery of my destroyed ramp hit me like a punch to the gut. I immediately called my neighbor, who confirmed that they had captured the entire incident on video. The footage was damning. Karen, with an expression of self-righteous fury, had swung by with her clipboard and, in a flurry of activity, had set about demolishing the ramp. Using what looked like a sledgehammer and a series of unapproved tools, she methodically dismantled the structure that symbolized my independence. Fury surged through me as I watched the video for the 100th time, noting every detail, the precise angle of her swing, the curt, barking command she issued to herself as if following an internal script. I knew that this was not a spontaneous act of vandalism. It was a calculated move designed to intimidate and assert her control over my property. Karen had always taken pleasure in enforcing her version of perfection, but destroying a ramp built to aid my mobility was a line she should never have crossed. I immediately began compiling evidence. I saved every frame of the video, printed out screenshots, and documented the exact time and circumstances of the incident. I also collected testimonies from neighbors who witnessed the chaos from their windows and heard Karen's angry outbursts echo through the quiet street. The mounting evidence painted a clear picture. Karen's actions were not only a gross abuse of power, but also a violation of my civil rights as a homeowner. Determined to seek justice, I decided that the next step was to confront the HOA board. I scheduled a meeting with several board members who had shown signs of independence in the past. Armed with my digital dossier, I laid out the facts. My ramp, built with my own hands and essential to my daily life, had been deliberately destroyed by someone who had no right to interfere with my property. I argued that Karen's actions were not only an abuse of her self-appointed authority, but also a public affront to the values of fairness and dignity that should define our community. At first, some board members hesitated, caught between loyalty to Karen and the undeniable evidence I presented. Rumors began circulating among residents, whispers that if the board did nothing, this abuse of power would continue unabated. I reached out on community forums and social media, sharing snippets of the video and urging others to stand up for their rights. The digital response was immediate and explosive. Hashtags like #RampRights and #NoMoreKaren started trending locally, and supportive comments flooded in from neighbors who had long felt oppressed by the HOA's arbitrary enforcement. Despite the growing public outcry, Karen remained defiant. She posted a statement on the community website, insisting that her actions were in the best interest of community aesthetics and that the ramp was a violation of obscure zoning regulations. Her words, laced with condescension, only fueled the fire. I knew that if Karen tried to justify her actions, the digital evidence would speak for itself, a truth captured in crisp video frames and echoed in the voices of a community tired of being bullied. In the days that followed, tensions escalated. The HOA board, pressured by both digital evidence and the collective voice of the residents, called for an emergency meeting to address the issue. I was invited to present my case before the board and the community. I arrived with my dossier in hand and a steely determination in my eyes. In a meeting that grew increasingly heated, I recounted every detail of the incident, emphasizing that the ramp was not just a convenience, but a critical lifeline that allowed me to live independently. The board's response was mixed. Some members sympathized with my plight, acknowledging that the ramp was a matter of civil rights. Others, still loyal to Karen, tried to downplay the incident as a misunderstanding or an isolated case of overzealous behavior. The debate raged on, punctuated by heated exchanges and hushed conversations among board members. I could sense that the community's patience was wearing thin. If the board failed to take action, the mounting evidence and public support would force their hand. Every day, as I reviewed new comments and shared additional footage on social media, the movement grew stronger. Neighbors began recounting their own experiences of arbitrary fines and petty enforcements by the HOA. The digital petition I started reached thousands of signatures, and the pressure on the board became palpable. It was clear that if nothing was done, Karen's behavior would become a precedent, a dangerous precedent that could stifle the rights of every resident in Elmwood Heights. With the tension reaching a fever pitch, I prepared for the next phase of the battle, a final public hearing that would force the HOA board to confront the reality of Karen's overreach. I meticulously organized all my evidence and drafted a statement that underscored the importance of individual rights, dignity, and the freedom to live without fear of arbitrary interference. This was not just my fight. It was the fight of every resident who believed that property rights were sacred. And as the day of the hearing loomed closer, I could feel the collective energy of a community on the brink of a breakthrough. In the days after the incident, the digital world of Elmwood Heights exploded with discussion, outrage, and support. Social media was flooded with posts featuring the video of my ramp's destruction. Each clip, each screenshot, every detail meticulously shared with hashtags like #RampRights, #StopKaren, and #StandUpForFreedom. The footage was undeniable. Karen, armed with a sledgehammer and a clipboard, had methodically dismantled my wheelchair ramp, a structure built with sweat, tears, and countless hours of hard work. The public reaction was swift. Residents, many of whom had experienced similar abuses at the hands of the HOA, rallied behind my cause, declaring that personal property rights and dignity were non-negotiable. Local news stations were quick to pick up the story. Reporters arrived on the scene, capturing the devastation of my once proud ramp and interviewing shocked neighbors who recounted the incident in hushed, incredulous tones. "It's a travesty," one neighbor said, "when someone's basic right to access their home is trampled by an overzealous enforcer." The narrative quickly evolved from a personal grievance into a broader commentary on the dangers of unchecked HOA power and the suppression of individual rights. Inside the HOA board, the fallout was palpable. Emergency meetings were convened behind closed doors, and leaked minutes soon appeared online, revealing deep divisions among board members. Some insisted that every rule must be enforced, no matter how trivial, while others began to question whether Karen's personal vendettas were in fact undermining the community's trust. Heated arguments broke out over whether a wheelchair ramp, an essential accessibility feature, could ever be considered a violation of aesthetic standards. The internal strife added fuel to the digital fire, and soon, online petitions demanding accountability and reform amassed thousands of signatures. I continued to update my digital dossier, sharing every new piece of evidence and every supportive comment from my neighbors. Videos of the ramp's destruction, combined with heartfelt testimonials about the struggles faced by residents with disabilities, painted a damning picture of an HOA that prioritized conformity over compassion. The #RampRights evolved into a rallying cry for a movement that transcended my own situation, a fight for the rights of every individual to live without hindrance, without being bullied by those who believe themselves the arbiters of community aesthetics. Karen Miller, for her part, attempted to salvage her reputation by issuing statements that claimed her actions were for the greater good and that the ramp's design violated community guidelines. But every statement she made was countered by the overwhelming digital evidence and the resounding voices of a community that refused to be silenced. Her social media posts became increasingly erratic, and soon, the public began to question not just her motives, but her competence. The tension in Elmwood Heights reached a boiling point as the final public hearing was announced. The community center was soon abuzz with preparations for a meeting that promised to be the turning point in this ongoing battle. Neighbors organized grassroots rallies, and flyers calling for justice were distributed throughout the community. Every shared video clip and every digital petition reinforced one inescapable fact. If the HOA board did not act to rein in Karen's abuse of power, the oppressive culture of arbitrary rule enforcement would continue to plague our community. In the days leading up to the hearing, I held small meetings with supportive neighbors to discuss our strategy. We reviewed every detail of the evidence and planned our testimonies. It became clear that this was not just a personal fight. It was a struggle for the rights and dignity of every resident in Elmwood Heights, especially those who depended on accessible features like wheelchair ramps. The movement grew, and I could feel the collective energy building, a community united by the belief that every individual deserved to live with respect and freedom. On the eve of the hearing, as darkness fell over Elmwood Heights, I sat by my window and reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The ramp that had once been a symbol of my independence was now a rallying point for a broader cause, a call for justice that had resonated with countless residents. I felt a deep sense of responsibility, knowing that the outcome of the hearing would set a precedent for the future of our community. With my digital dossier secured and the voices of my neighbors echoing in my mind, I steeled myself for the final confrontation. The decisive moment arrived on a crisp, clear morning at the Elmwood Heights Community Center, where the final public hearing was underway. The boardroom was packed with a diverse assembly of HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and resolute residents, all gathered to witness the verdict that would determine the future of our community's governance. With calm authority and an unwavering resolve, Councilwoman Samantha Lewis stepped up to the podium, her eyes reflecting the collective determination of every person in the room. After an exhaustive review of all digital evidence, including security footage of the ramp's destruction, detailed records of fines and complaints, and the impassioned testimonies of our residents, we have reached a conclusion that leaves no room for doubt. Councilwoman Lewis began, her voice both measured and powerful. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Miller, specifically her deliberate act of destroying an essential accessibility feature on private property, were not only a gross abuse of power, but a flagrant violation of the rights of our community members. Our neighborhood's commitment to fairness and accessibility must prevail over personal vendettas and arbitrary rule enforcement. A heavy silence descended as Lewis continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all fines related to this incident and initiate a full disciplinary review of the practices that permitted such an egregious overreach. Furthermore, new guidelines will be implemented to safeguard the rights of every resident to maintain their property as they see fit, especially when it comes to ensuring accessibility. Today's decision is not merely about reversing an unjust fine. It is a resounding declaration that Elmwood Heights will stand for justice, dignity, and the inalienable right to live without undue interference. Her words resonated deeply with the assembled crowd, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. At that moment, a respected community advocate, a tireless defender of the rights of those with disabilities, rose to speak. "Today, we stand united as one," he declared, his voice firm and filled with passion. "No resident should ever have their fundamental rights compromised by the arbitrary actions of an overzealous enforcer. Let this vote be the turning point, a clear signal that our community values accessibility, independence, and the dignity of every individual above petty bureaucratic control. We demand accountability, and we will not rest until every violation of our rights is met with swift, decisive action." His words were met with thunderous applause, uniting the room in a resolute call for change. Following his address, a senior officer from the local civil rights office presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all evidence, including expert testimonies on accessibility standards and official reports that confirmed the legality of my ramp's design. The evidence was irrefutable. My wheelchair ramp was a legally compliant, essential modification to ensure my independence, and Karen Miller's actions were nothing short of vandalism. The Internal Affairs panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures, and the full report was slated for immediate public release. Councilwoman Lewis concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Elmwood Heights, a community where every resident's rights are protected and where public authority is exercised with fairness, respect, and transparency." Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will defend our freedoms and that no one, regardless of their self-appointed status, can impose their will on our community without accountability. Together, we stand for justice, dignity, and the right to live independently. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our battle for property rights and accessibility. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Elmwood Heights. The days of petty, arbitrary rule enforcement were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights and accessibility was finally within our grasp. In the weeks that followed the historic vote, Elmwood Heights experienced a profound transformation. News of the rescinded fines and sweeping reforms enacted by the HOA board spread rapidly through local media and online communities, sparking vigorous debates about property rights, accessibility, and the proper balance between order and individual freedom. Editorials in the local newspaper, with headlines such as "A New Dawn for Elmwood Heights" and "Community United for Accessibility," celebrated the decisive action taken to uphold the rights of every resident. Hashtags like #AccessibilityMatters, #NoMoreHOBullying, and #PropertyRights rallied across social media, reinforcing our collective determination to stand against arbitrary interference. Town hall meetings and community forums saw unprecedented attendance as residents gathered to share their experiences and envision a future where every individual's needs were respected. Neighbors who had long lived in fear of punitive fines and invasive oversight now spoke openly about their right to maintain their property, especially when it came to essential modifications like wheelchair ramps. Our homes are our sanctuaries, and every resident deserves the freedom to access them without fear, one impassioned speaker declared, his voice resonating through a packed auditorium. The atmosphere was charged with hope, a promise that Elmwood Heights would forever champion the rights of its members. Within the reformed HOA board and local civil rights departments, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and a responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary procedures were established to ensure that every complaint was carefully scrutinized and that no resident would ever again suffer from arbitrary fines or unwarranted interference. Our duty is to protect the dignity and rights of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed affirmed during a follow-up press conference, reinforcing our renewed commitment to fairness and justice. Community leaders and local advocacy groups mobilized further by organizing workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns that emphasize the importance of accessibility and creative freedom. When we stand together, our voices are powerful enough to dismantle outdated systems, a local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring neighbors to unite in the fight for a more equitable community. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was both deeply personal and transformative. My decision to stand up against HOA Karen's reckless destruction of my wheelchair ramp, an act that robbed me of my independence, had sparked a movement that resonated far beyond my personal struggle. Neighbors who had long been marginalized by arbitrary rules began to share their own stories of injustice, and together we forged a collective call for change. The digital evidence that captured every moment of Karen's abuse became a beacon of hope, a rallying cry for every resident who believed that accessibility and property rights were non-negotiable. Karen Miller, once the formidable enforcer of Elmwood Heights' draconian rules, was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that no one is above accountability when a community stands united for justice. Her influence waned rapidly as records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the urgent need for reform and the dangers of unchecked authority. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Elmwood Heights, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the gentle glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading "Unity, Freedom, and Accessibility" was unfurled between towering oak trees, and heartfelt speeches echoed with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate not just the restoration of our rights, but the triumph of community over tyranny, Councilwoman Lewis proclaimed, her voice filled with conviction. The resounding standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our collective commitment to ensuring that every resident could live freely and independently. As each new day dawned over Elmwood Heights, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how HOA Karen Miller's destruction of my wheelchair ramp was captured in damning detail by a vigilant neighbor, and how it sparked a community-wide demand for justice, became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the sanctity of personal freedom and accessibility. Every sunrise now carried with it the promise that in Elmwood Heights, truth, justice, and individual dignity would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Elmwood Heights would forever be a place where creativity, integrity, and respect for individual accessibility shone brightly.